Well, hello, Shawn Pfaff. Glad to be with you today. I am pinch hitting for Catherine Schneider this month for the Fitchburg Historical Society's Interview of the Month. As you know, the Fitchburg Historical Society is a great asset to the city of Fitchburg. We're an organization that meets about 6 times a year. We have a 12-person board, and we do a great job of talking about history in Fitchburg, way back to early times when the Irish settlers came to Fitchburg, to turn-of-the-century events, and to modern events that have occurred in Fitchburg. Fitchburg has an illustrious history, and we want to tell that story. And this month, we are very excited about our interview. And this month, we are previewing our upcoming fall meeting. The Fitchburg Historical Society has 2 public meetings a year where we invite the general public. We get great attendance. And this fall, on Sunday, November 10th, the Packers do not play that day, Sunday, November 10th at 1:30 p.m., in the Fitchburg Library, we are hosting our fall meeting. And as you know, November 10th is right before Veterans Day. And this year we're going to focus on veterans and the impact that veterans make to our society and have made to our society, but also how to research if your family has veterans, and to go way back and find some great stories about veterans here in Fitchburg, Dane County, and across the state. So I reached out as an emissary for the Fitchburg Historical Society to the Veterans Museum of Wisconsin. You know, just being a suburb of Madison, so close to downtown, it's amazing how many amenities we have in the state capital area. And the Veterans Museum is just second to none. And one of the programs that the Veterans Museum does regarding veterans and around Veterans Day is talk about genealogy of veterans and how you can research your past that may have veterans involved. So as I said, on Sunday, November 10th at 1:30 p.m., we're going to have a program called Finding Those Who Served, Military Genealogy at the Wisconsin's Veterans Museum. And today I am honored to be joined by Russ Horton. Russ is a Reference and Outreach Archivist at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum here in Madison. The son and grandson of Army veterans, he has worked at the museum for more than 20 years. In that time, he has helped thousands of genealogists and researchers from across the United States, Wisconsin, of course, learn more about Wisconsin veterans and their stories. Russ, we are honored to have you here today and join us.
Oh, thank you so much.
We are, as a historical society, we always want to make sure that people know their past as they move in their future. And one of the great things about the Historical Society is our fall meeting. And thank you for agreeing to be our speaker. I think we have had great reception about that. So I'd like you to just share a little bit, Russ, about your background, how you came to be so interested in history. Obviously, you have a family connection to veterans. And this time of the year, as we get to celebrate Veterans Day, what that means to you and your research. So take it away and tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. So I grew up in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, a little northeast of here. I grew up knowing that my grandfather was a World War II veteran, and not necessarily knowing until later that my father was a Vietnam-era Army veteran. So I do have that connection to the military, and that kind of got me interested in military history. When I came to UW-Madison for college, I became a history major. I continued my interest in military history, researching the Civil War particularly. As many history majors experience, I had to start wondering what to do with a history major.
Sure.
And I became aware that archives was a great way to stay involved in the history field and help other people learn about history and get excited about history. So I went to UW-Milwaukee to pursue a double master's degree in history and library science. I was lucky enough to get my foot in the door at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum in 2001, and I've been there since. I've worn a couple different hats there, but for the last 18 years, I've been the Reference and Outreach Archivist, which means that I'm helping researchers come in, everyone from genealogists to professional historians, and helping them to use our collections in the archives, our letters, our diaries, our photographs, to learn more about Wisconsin veterans and Wisconsin's role in American military history.
Well, as you know, and we'll get into the specifics of our program shortly here in Fitchburg, but just kind of a big picture a little bit here, Russ. Civil War, everywhere you go, I've spent time working in the state capitol, and everybody in our state, I hopefully or assume soon we'll get to our state capitol. You cannot help but see all the Civil War influence in the state capitol, the Grand Army of the Republic room, Governor's Conference room, all of those things. And if I'm correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, Wisconsin sent 91,000 Wisconsinites, I think, to the Civil War, that number. Why is that such a integral part of veterans studies, the Civil War in Wisconsin? Is right after our statehood, but you have an interest in the Civil War, and so do I. Just take it from there, why the Civil War always piques everybody's interest, it seems.
Yeah, I think, well, for Wisconsin, you're right that it's the first major conflict after Wisconsin became a state. So I think that that's why it's so vital for Wisconsin. But in general, I think the Civil War is just, it very quickly became kind of this mythic conflict with colorful personalities and epic battles, and because all of the states were involved, almost everyone has a connection to it.
Okay.
So I think those are some of the forces that drive it, and it quickly became the topic of thousands and hundreds of thousands of books, and it continually generates new interest.
Do you get a lot of folks in the Civil War kind of lane here questions? A lot of folks ask about Camp Randall and kind of that part of Wisconsin history with the Civil War and kind of what our role was and those kind of things. Are those kind of the questions that come in, or what kind of questions would people be asking?
I mean, the most common kind of question we get is genealogical in nature.
Okay.
Someone either knows that they have an ancestor who served in the Civil War, or else they've heard a family rumor that maybe they had an ancestor who served in the Civil War. So that's the most common entry point, I guess, is wanting to find out about an individual. We certainly do get questions that are more general or broader in the role of Wisconsin in the Civil War, or, I ran across this historical sign up north. What does it mean? Regarding Camp Randall, I think, in my experience, outside of the Madison area, not a lot of people know that Camp Randall was a Civil War training ground, so that's always a surprise for them. Yeah.
That's the case. I'm a little bit of a homer, so I would assume that people would know more about that. So we want to tackle at our Historical Society program, obviously Veterans Day is the next day, and people have a lot of interest in genealogical. I am the son of dairy farmers from western Wisconsin, both on my mom and my dad's side. So I think I can sit across the table from you, Russ, and say I don't have a lot of military background in my family, but I'm excited to hear from you. But if someone are just, the 23s and me's and all these things are out there, and everybody's interested in this, we're trying to find out our being and our place, what can you do and what services can you provide, and how would someone tackle that if they're maybe not the most sophisticated in genealogical research, but they're just curious? I heard from an uncle at a family reunion over the summer that great Uncle Charlie was in the World War I and fought in France and things like that. How do you kind of help people get started?
Sure. So there are a couple easy ways to get started. On our website, the Wisconsin Veterans Museum website, we have a Civil War, a Spanish-American War, and a World War I database that you can use to search any Wisconsin resident who served in any of those conflicts. They'll come up. So a lot of people they'll just put in their last name and maybe their community in those databases, and they'll bring up names, and if something looks familiar, they'll pursue it.
So it could be Bob Smith, Campbellsport. I mean, Bob Smith's a pretty easy name.
It's a pretty common name,
but you know what I'm saying. Campbellsport is very unique.
Yeah, yep. So that's one way to go about it. People can also just kind of reach out. Because we have so much experience helping genealogists, we can usually recommend some different ways, like, an obituary is a really great way. If you're not sure if you have a veteran in your family, finding their obituaries and reading through them can be a great point in the right direction. If a person served in the military, their obituary 99 times out of 100 is going to mention it. And if it doesn't mention it, that's a pretty good indicator that they didn't serve. So that's an easy way to at least have an idea of, well, maybe I should pursue this further, or else, well, it doesn't seem like it. We get a lot of people who have family stories. Great uncle so-and-so was in the war. What can you tell me about him? And we'll either point them to the database, or else we can search some other sources there. But that's kind of the entryway, are those databases. And then once we can establish that a person served, we have service records and other resources that we can use to find out more about them and their service.
So the database, I mean, your career obviously is 2001, so you're basically the trajectory of the modern day internet. So you kind of built this thing, or how big is that, and how exhaustive is that, or how huge is that?
Yeah,
and how do you build that?
So it's quite a process. We've enlisted volunteers throughout the years and the decades to kind of enter all
Oh,
of this
okay.
information. But there are printed sources that have all of this information. So Wisconsin printed a 3-volume roster of their volunteers in the Civil War back in 1912, and we have state records for World War I and Spanish-American War veterans from the state that just aren't as accessible in the printed form. So we entered them into this database. There were, as you said, there were between 80 and 90,000 Civil War vets. Smaller number for the Spanish-American War, but there are 120,000 men and women from Wisconsin who served in World War I. So it's a big database, and being able to search it by a bunch of different ways, last name, community, unit, it just makes it so much more accessible.
So there's different ways to get into it and sort it and toggle here for this and that, things like that. How far, Russ, can you go back? I mean, we have a cemetery in Fitchburg, and Catherine, my colleague and friend on the Historical Society board, did a wonderful program in midsummer, late spring, and went out to the cemetery. We can go back to the Revolutionary War, some folks in Fitchburg here. How far can you go back?
So in terms of our service records, military service records, we go back to the Civil War. That's that's when Wisconsin was a state, and that's when the state began collecting records. But we do have the ability to access other sources if folks do have an ancestor who was in the War of 1812 or the Revolutionary War. We can either try to find that information, or we're able to point them in the right direction to find out more.
So, and then I guess another just a technical question. If we'll just say a name is Jones, and then Jones's maternal side served, so mom's name and the name switches over to dad. Could you find Jones's maternal grandparents or great-grandparents, even though there's different last names? How do you kind of connect that research, if you know what I mean?
Sure. So, we can do some of it ourselves. We can also just advise folks on things. With resources available now like Ancestry.com, where you can see census records, it's much easier to find those connections. If you can find one person on Ancestry, you can generally find their spouse and their family name. It becomes much easier, and that's where obituaries can come into play again. There are different ways to find that out, but it's generally doable.
So Fitchburg Historical Society has a wonderful website, and our president, Alan Tariba, does all of us work on it, but he does just incredible work on obituaries, hundreds of obituaries on there. What do you do with those, or do local historical societies send you in information, or should they, or how do you communicate with historical societies like ours? I mean, obviously you're going to be a guest in our program. We'll talk about that in a second, but what is your outreach around the state with different historical societies or county genealogical societies, or just amateur folks in different groups and clubs around the state?
Sure. We try to collaborate as much as possible. We recognize that some sources are more prevalent on the local level. So when people reach out to us about a veteran, say from Dodge County in Wisconsin, I will help them as much as I can, and then I almost always will end with suggestions for other places to look in. That usually would be the county level, a county historical society, the public library, because those places have sources that sometimes you might not be able to find online because it might not be cataloged, but if you just reach out and talk to someone on the phone or correspond with someone via email, you can find out about those things.
So there's American Legion, VFWs, county veteran service organizations. Do you work with those groups closely at all?
For sure. So the Wisconsin Veterans Museum is an activity of the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs.
Of course.
So we do get questions through the county veteran service officers, kind of through that relationship, and same with veteran service organizations like the Legion and the VFW. We get questions from them. We get they point donors of materials our way. I think the relationship's strengthening there and becoming good.
So 2 more questions before we get into the specific of our program. What do you think people are most surprised of when they research veterans? What do they find? Is there a theme of like, wow, the gruesomeness of the battle, or wow, I did, the training, or what do you see that people find out that they're just kind of like, Oh, wow, that's incredible.
Oh, that's a really good question. I think, there's kind of two ends to that.
Sure.
One is, yes, I think there is surprise when people discover what their ancestors endured in the military, the places they went, the conditions they had to face, marches and the kind of food that they were eating and the battles. That's kind of on one end of the spectrum. But I think on the other end, people can also be quite surprised by the commonality of the experience and
Sure.
how no matter the conflict or the place that they're serving, you still have men and women who are away from home, who are curious about what's happening at home and who are sharing the information that they have with the folks back home. So, Wisconsin, up until recently, was a fairly rural state.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of people from farms and from rural communities who'd never left their county or their state before, and suddenly they're serving in France or the South Pacific or North Africa, and they are far from home, and they want to know how the harvest is coming. They want to know how Aunt Sally's doing.
Yeah, right.
So in some of the letters that we have in our collection, that's what you'll find, and that's what people I think are sometimes surprised at, is how if you chopped the date off of some of these letters, you wouldn't be able to tell what era it's from, because they're just so similar. And like, hey, what's happening at home? I miss you guys.
How's harvest going?
How's harvest? Why aren't you writing more? And then at the same time, like, hey, I just met the people who are native to this region, and this is what it was like, or I just saw this tourist site. And because a lot of times, due to military censorship, they couldn't write about the specifics of battle, so they had to focus on other things, what they were eating, the weather. So I think there are extremes of battle and conditions, but then there's also kind of the common experience of someone away from home, missing home, and describing what they're experiencing.
So I do a little real estate in my career, and you always see people that do, estate sales and things like that. Let's just say we have a widow who passes away, and her husband was in Vietnam or Korean War, and they have all these things, and kids are like, I don't know what to do with this. What do I do with this? Shawn, you help me out, or can your brokerage firm help out? Do you work with families like that? Or so if somebody were to call you and say, Russ, I think I really got something good here. You want to come and look at it? What's that process look like to kind of help a widow or a son or daughter of, they know their parent was a decorated hero, or not hero, but a warrior, or whatever, I guess a hero, if you would.
Absolutely.
What do you do with that?
Yeah, so our one of the messages we want to get across to people who have things from a veteran is our museum's motto is every veteran is a story. So sometimes people will think, well, this isn't important enough. My ancestor served stateside. My ancestor didn't serve in any battles. You're probably not going to want it. And really the opposite is true. We think everyone who served in the military has a story that's worth preserving and sharing. So if people do have things that are related to a Wisconsin veteran, they can reach out to us. The process looks like we just have a conversation with them about what they have. Unfortunately, we don't have unlimited space, so we can't accept everything.
You can't take every artifact.
We'd love to, but we just don't have the resources to handle it. So we'll talk to them. We'll find out what they have. Sometimes there are things that we really are interested in that people assume we wouldn't want, like letters and photographs, because those are the things that really help us to feel like we know the person, right? So we have that conversation, we figure out the sorts of things that we might be interested in, and then we meet somewhere, either at the museum or at their home, or sometimes people will just mail things into us, and then the museum kind of takes it from there, and we have a whole process that we go through. So it's really easy. It just starts with an email or a phone call.
As I said, we are going to have our program on Sunday, November 10th at 1:30 p.m. Packers don't play that day, so you can certainly come. Russ, we did schedule around the Packers.
I appreciate that.
It's Wisconsin. But we are lucky and fortunate to have some of this professional talent and experience join us. So this program that we're having on November 10th, it is the day before Veterans Day, and you've traveled around the state and you speak in front of groups all the time. What can we anticipate from you, and kind of how are you going to present your materials, and can you drill it down to stories of Fitchburg or Dane County and point out a few specific examples and things like that? So What are we going to be looking forward to seeing from you?
Sure. So I'm going to be talking about just kind of how to get started researching a veteran. I think it can be a little overwhelming at times to think of how to start. So just talking about some of the common questions that people have.
Like what would one of those be?
You know, did my ancestors serve in any battles? What unit were they in? Were they wounded?
Were they stateside, or were they okay?
Yep, just
Okay.
those kind of basic questions. Sure. And then starting to just slowly introduce the resources that you can use to answer those questions. I kind of go conflict by conflict. So we start with the Civil War and we work through the present, pointing out things on our website that you can use, other ways that you can contact us to find out about it. So really just trying to make what might seem like an overwhelming task.
You're kind of a tour guide to get us in and out of the...
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so do audiences kind of have the same thematic questions and things like that? Or what should our audience members be prepared for? Anything they need to bring? Just curiosity, of course, but also...
Yeah, I mean, they can, if they have information about an ancestor, if they have a document that they're not sure how to decipher, I mean, that is one of the things I talk about, is that the military loves to use abbreviations and acronyms and jargon, and sometimes it's really hard to figure out what that means. So I've definitely had people who will bring in a discharge form and say, I have no idea what this means. Can you help me figure that out? Or they'll bring in, sometimes they like to do a little show and tell, like, hey, I've got these letters from
So you're okay if people bring stuff in?
It's okay with me, absolutely.
Okay.
I might try to talk to them about donating those things. But,
okay, good. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. We love to see that stuff.
Cool. So again, folks, bring in souvenirs or artifacts from your family if you have some neat stuff. Russ has got incredible professional experience and judgment where you can determine if that's where you want to use or not. Other questions I would have for our program is anything, stories out of Dane County or this part that you've seen. I mean, you live in the greater Dane County area, but you grew up outside of Oshkosh. Any kind of stories? I know in my hometown, the Legion in my hometown is named after somebody who got the Purple Heart. We all knew about this little farm town, to your point earlier, in western Wisconsin. And Stanley Christensen was his name, and we all know his story, things like that. Anything kind of surprise you in this area of veterans, or any surprises around the state that you've seen that are just, I mean, incredible acts of valor all over, of course, but just anything you want to share?
There are incredible stories. We have a collection from an engineer from Beaver Dam, not too far from Madison, right?
Yeah.
Who served in the Army Air Corps during World War I. And he, on November 10th, he was up on a flight. And he shot down he shot down a German plane, and it turned out that the war ended the next day. So this guy from Beaver Dam shot down the last German plane in World War I.
We might hear more about that in your presentation.
Yep.
Excellent.
Absolutely. So there's just a million stories like that in our collection of interesting things that Wisconsin men and women did in the military and accomplished. And sometimes it's hard to pick them out because there's so many of them. I
guess, Russ, I want to just go back up a little, 50,000 feet a second. Do you get the theme? You know, war is tough. War is complicated. Many wars aren't always as clean as some wars. You know, Vietnam, obviously, I wasn't born then, but has a history of opposition and stuff. But overall, is Wisconsin's perceived, I mean, pretty pro-veteran when we start telling these stories, right? And people seem like the history when they come home of stories of veterans of kind of throughout history have been received well when they come home. A lot of those stories you have? Or?
Yeah, I think Wisconsin has a very proud history of
supporting
military service and also veterans activities. Okay. You know, the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs was started right after World War II and instantly started administering the GI Bill and those sorts of veterans benefits. Veterans organizations like the Legion and the VFW have always been very active in the state of Wisconsin. So yeah, I do think that's a strong current that runs through our state.
Well, we are just honored that you have joined us today. And Russ, I want to ask you one question, kind of in your professional judgment and things. Veterans Day means a lot, and for future generations, you are putting your impact, your history of your family. You said about your father and your grandfather, am I correct? About having military background. What is the lessons we should take as folks that are studying veterans, studying, honoring them, trying to continue on their legacy and stuff like that? What does Veterans Day mean to you and we should consider as folks here in Wisconsin that are going to attend the program?
Sure. I mean, I guess I return to the museum's motto that every veteran is a story, and I think the best way for me personally to honor veterans is to give them the opportunity to tell their story, and then to ensure that that story is remembered. And I think that's what our museum really strives to do, is to preserve and share the stories of Wisconsin veterans, to make sure that their sacrifices aren't forgotten. Because whether they served stateside or overseas, they answered the call and they did what they were asked to do, and that deserves to be honored and remembered.
Well, that's said well. Again, I was joined by Russ Horton. He is a Reference and Outreach Archivist at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum in Madison. He is the son and grandson of Army veterans, and he's worked at the museum for more than 20 years. In that time, he's helped thousands of genealogists of all experience levels and researchers learn more about Wisconsin veterans and their story. The Wisconsin Veterans Museum is rooted in the 1901 founding of the Grand Army of the Republic, a great Civil War reference, in the Wisconsin state capitol. Today, the museum has risen to become one of Wisconsin's premier military museums, and is key educational activity of the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs. The museum staff showcases the stories of Wisconsin veterans of all branches of service, from the Civil War, which Wisconsin had a huge impact in, to the present, demonstrating the enduring relevance of every veteran experience. I would also like to add that while the exhibit galleries are open there to the public during operating hours, there's a research center where genealogists might do research on their own, or they could set up an appointment with somebody like Russ or his colleagues. So you don't have to just be boxed into the normal office hours if you're at work and things like that. And again, we were so honored to be joined by Russ today. And please join us, the Fitchburg Historical Society, on Sunday, November 10th from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. here at the Fitchburg Public Library. The event is free and open to the public. And again, if you'd like to know more about a veteran in your family, join us for our fall program featuring Russ Horton of the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. And of course, if you want to reach out and do more detailed research, reach out to us at the Fitchburg Historical Society. We can work with you. There is a space that we have at the Fitchburg Library that is dedicated to the Fitchburg Historical Society. Like I said, we have a 12-member board. All of us have different life experiences. Several members of the board has families go back as far as Fitchburg becoming first settled in the mid to early 1840s. So again, thank you for your time, and as we approach this beautiful fall weather and season, let's not forget the importance of Veterans Day. And again, please join us on Sunday, November 10th at 1:30 p.m. as we have a wonderful program with the State Veterans Museum. Thank you, Russ, and thank you to you and the public.